42 Mother Bear created special formula for babies. Allergic to everything, what happened next was miraculous. The forest held its breath that morning, as if the entire world had paused to witness something extraordinary. Lily Morgan pressed her back against the rough bark of an ancient pine tree, her binoculars trembling slightly in her hands. She had come to these woods 3 months ago, seeking solitude after her research grant had been rejected for the 5th time. The academic world had grown tired of her theories about animal intelligence, dismissing her work as anthropomorphism dressed up in scientific language. But what she was watching now defied every textbook she had ever read, every lecture she had ever attended. A massive black bear, her coat gleaming in the filtered sunlight, moved through the undergrowth with a purpose that seemed almost human. The bear wasn't foraging for food in the usual way. She wasn't digging for grubs or stripping bark from trees. Instead, she was selecting specific plants with the precision of someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. The bear's movements were deliberate and careful. She would sniff a plant, sometimes rejecting it entirely, other times taking only certain leaves while leaving others untouched. Lily watched as the bear gathered moss from the north side of specific trees, ignoring identical-looking moss just inches away. The creature collected tiny purple flowers that grew in the shadows of fallen logs, flowers so small that Lily hadn't even noticed them until the bear pointed them out with her actions. Each item was carried back to a hollowed-out area beneath a massive oak tree, where 2 small forms lay almost motionless. The cubs were so still that at first, Lily had thought they were dead. Their breathing was shallow, their tiny bodies seeming to sink into the earth itself. Their fur, which should have been thick and glossy, was patchy and dull. Something was terribly wrong with them, something that went beyond normal sickness. The mother bear began to work with her collection of plants. Using a flat stone as a surface, she crushed the leaves and flowers together with her massive paws, adding drops of morning dew that she had somehow collected in a curved piece of bark. The precision of her movements made Lily's heart race. This wasn't instinct. This wasn't some pre-programmed behavior passed down through genetics. This was problem-solving. This was medicine. The bear mixed and mashed, occasionally adding new ingredients, sometimes removing others, as if following a recipe that existed only in her mind. The resulting paste was a deep green color, almost luminescent in the dappled sunlight. The mother bear scooped small amounts onto her paw and gently, so gently that it brought tears to Lily's eyes, fed it to her cubs. The little ones barely responded at first, their mouths opening just enough to accept the strange medicine. Lily had been a scientist for 15 years. She had published papers on animal behavior, had spent countless hours observing creatures in their natural habitats. But she had never seen anything like this. The methodical way the bear prepared her medicine, the careful selection of ingredients, the obvious intentionality behind every action. It challenged everything she thought she knew about the boundaries between human and animal intelligence. She made detailed notes in her weathered journal, her handwriting becoming increasingly excited and messy as she documented each observation. The bear returned to her gathering, leaving the cubs to rest. This time, she ventured further from the den, and Lily carefully followed, maintaining a safe distance. The bear led her to a small creek where specific algae grew on certain rocks. The bear scraped it off with her claws, but only from rocks that were partially submerged, never from those that were fully underwater or completely dry. As the days passed, Lily established a routine. She would arrive before dawn, positioning herself where she could observe without disturbing. She brought better equipment: a camera with a powerful zoom lens, recording devices, sample collection kits. but she was careful never to interfere, never to get too close. The bear seemed aware of her presence but showed no aggression, almost as if she understood that Lily meant no harm. On the fourth day, something changed. One of the cubs lifted its head. It was a small movement, barely noticeable, but to Lily it was everything. The cub's eyes, which had been dull and unfocused, showed a spark of life. It made a soft whimpering sound, and the mother bear immediately responded, preparing a fresh batch of her medicine. This time, the cub actively participated in feeding, its tiny tongue licking the green paste from its mother's paw. The forest around the den began to feel different. Lily couldn't explain it scientifically, but there was an energy there, a sense of something ancient and wise at work. Other animals seemed to sense it too. Deer would graze peacefully nearby. Usually skittish birds would sing from lower branches, and even a fox had been seen resting not far from the bear's den. It was as if the entire forest community understood that something important was happening here, something that transcended the usual predator-prey relationships. Lily found herself thinking about all the knowledge that might exist in nature. Knowledge that humans had never discovered because they had never thought to look for it. How many other animals possessed this kind of understanding? How many remedies existed in the forest that science had never documented? By the end of the first week, both cubs were showing signs of improvement. They could lift their heads, their eyes tracked movement, and they made soft sounds that seemed to please their mother. The bear continued her treatment regimen with unwavering dedication. She would gather ingredients in the morning, prepare the medicine with the same careful precision, and feed her cubs throughout the day. At night, she would curl around them, her massive body providing warmth and protection. Lily often stayed late into the evening, using night vision equipment to continue her observations. The dedication of the mother bear was both heartbreaking and inspiring. Here was a creature facing the potential loss of her offspring, and instead of accepting fate, she was fighting with tools that no human had taught her to use. The second week brought more dramatic changes. The cubs began to move, first just shifting positions, then actually crawling short distances. Their fur started to look healthier, gaining a shine that had been absent before. The mother bear's medicine routine adapted to their improvement. She began adding new ingredients, certain mushrooms that grew at the base of oak trees, specific insects that she would carefully crush and add to the mixture. It was as if she was adjusting the prescription based on her patient's progress. Lily documented everything, taking thousands of photographs, hours of video footage, and filling notebook after notebook with observations. She knew she was witnessing something unprecedented, something that could revolutionize the understanding of animal intelligence and natural medicine. One morning, Lily arrived to find the mother bear had left something near her usual observation spot. It was a small pile of the same plants the bear had been gathering, arranged almost like a gift. Lily's hands shook as she carefully collected the samples, placing them in specimen bags for later analysis. The bear watched from her den, those intelligent eyes seeming to communicate something beyond words. It was as if she was saying, "Here, study this. Learn what I know." The gesture was so deliberate, so obviously intentional, that Lily had to sit down to process what had just happened. This wasn't just observation anymore. This was communication. This was a bridge between species that challenged every scientific principle about animal cognition. The cubs continued to improve daily. They began to play, weakly at first, just pawing at each other while lying down. But soon they were sitting up, then standing, then taking their first wobbling steps. The mother bear watched them with what could only be described as joy. She would make soft, huffing sounds that seemed like laughter when they tumbled over each other. She continued the medicine regimen, but less frequently now, more as a supplement than a primary treatment. Lily noticed that the bear was also teaching her cubs about the plants. She would bring them along on gathering expeditions, showing them which plants to notice, which to avoid. The cubs would sniff and paw at the plants, learning through observation and experience. The transformation was remarkable. In just 2 weeks, the cubs had gone from death's door to behaving like normal, healthy bear cubs. They wrestled, they explored, they nursed from their mother with enthusiasm. The medicine had worked, but more than that, the entire process had revealed something profound about the depth of knowledge that existed in the natural world. Lily thought about all the times humans had dismissed animal behavior as mere instinct, all the times they had assumed that real medicine, real science, was a purely human domain. Yet here was a bear who had diagnosed an illness, formulated a treatment, and successfully cured her offspring using nothing but forest plants, and an understanding that seemed to surpass instinct. As the 3rd week began, Lily noticed changes in the forest itself. The area around the bear's den seemed more vibrant somehow. Plants grew lusher, flowers bloomed out of season, and there was a subtle luminescence to certain leaves during the twilight hours. It was as if the bear's medicine had affected not just her cubs, but the entire ecosystem around them. Other animals began to exhibit unusual behavior. A deer, with a pronounced limp, was seen eating some of the same plants the bear had gathered. Within days, its gait had improved. A bird with damaged feathers was observed rubbing against the moss the bear had collected, and its plumage began to repair itself. The forest was learning from the bear, adopting her knowledge, spreading her healing wisdom through the interconnected web of nature. Lily's scientific mind struggled to process what she was seeing. This went beyond anything she had ever studied. It suggested a level of communication and knowledge transfer between species that science had never acknowledged. She thought about publishing her findings, about the revolution it could cause in biology, ecology, and medicine, but she also thought about what would happen to this place if the world knew about it. Scientists would descend upon the forest. The bears would be captured, studied, their peaceful existence destroyed in the name of research. The delicate balance of this healing ecosystem would be shattered. She found herself torn between her duty as a scientist to share knowledge and her growing feeling that some mysteries were meant to be protected. One evening, as the sun set through the trees, painting everything in gold and amber, Lily watched the bear family settle for the night. The cubs, now healthy and strong, tumbled over their mother, playing and nipping at her ears. The mother bear tolerated their antics with patient affection, occasionally swatting them gently when they became too rambunctious. It was a scene of perfect natural harmony, a family saved by knowledge that existed outside human understanding. Lily packed up her equipment slowly, reluctant to leave. She had been alone in her discovery for 3 weeks now, carrying the weight of this incredible secret by herself. Tomorrow, she had decided, she would reach out to one colleague, just one, someone she trusted to understand the magnitude and sensitivity of what she had found. That colleague was Ethan Marshall, a botanist who had always been open to unconventional ideas. They had met at conferences over the years, had engaged in long debates about the intelligence of plants, the communication networks of forests, the possibility that nature held secrets that science had yet to discover. If anyone would believe her, if anyone would understand the need for discretion, it would be Ethan. She sent him a carefully worded email that night, attaching just a few photographs, just enough to pique his interest without revealing everything. She asked him to come alone, to tell no one, to bring his equipment but leave his skepticism behind. The response came within hours. Ethan would arrive in 3 days. He was intrigued, curious, and surprisingly, he seemed to already half believe that something extraordinary was waiting for him in the forest. The next morning brought a new development. The mother bear had begun creating larger batches of her medicine, more than her cubs could possibly need. She stored the excess in hollowed-out logs, covered with leaves to protect it from rain. It was clear she was preparing for something, though what that might be remained a mystery. The cubs, now fully recovered, spent their days exploring their territory, always under their mother's watchful eye. They showed remarkable intelligence, remembering which plants their mother had shown them, even attempting to create their own simple mixtures, though without their mother's skill. Lily watched them with a mixture of scientific fascination and genuine affection. She had become invested in their story, their survival, their future. 2 days before Ethan's arrival, something unusual happened. A young fawn appeared at the edge of the clearing, clearly sick. Its legs shook, its eyes were clouded, and it could barely stand. Its mother was nowhere to be seen, likely killed by predators or hunters. By all rights, the fawn should have been easy prey for the bear. Instead, the mother bear approached it slowly, making soft sounds that seemed designed to calm rather than threaten. She returned to her medicine stores and brought out a small amount of the green paste on a piece of bark. She placed it near the fawn and retreated. The fawn, driven by instinct or desperation, licked at the paste. The bear watched from a distance, her cubs beside her, as if teaching them that their knowledge was meant to be shared, not hoarded. Lily could barely breathe as she watched this interspecies act of compassion. The bear continued to leave medicine for the fawn over the next 2 days, never approaching too close, never threatening. The fawn began to improve, its legs growing steadier, its eyes clearing. On the morning of Ethan's arrival, the fawn was able to walk away on its own, disappearing into the forest depths. The bear watched it go with what seemed like satisfaction, then returned to her normal routine with her cubs. Lily had documented everything, had captured on film something that would challenge fundamental assumptions about animal behavior, about the capacity for altruism in nature, about the existence of medical knowledge outside human civilization. Ethan arrived just after dawn, his tall frame loaded with equipment, his face showing a mixture of excitement and skepticism. Lily met him at the edge of the forest, far from the bear's den, to explain what he was about to see. She showed him select photographs, shared some of her notes, watched his expression shift from doubt to amazement to an almost childlike wonder. He wanted to rush to see for himself, but Lily made him understand the need for patience, for respect, for maintaining the delicate balance that had allowed her to observe without disturbing. They approached the den slowly, Lily guiding Ethan to her observation spot, warning him to move quietly, to avoid sudden movements, to respect the sacred space they were entering. Ethan's first glimpse of the bear family rendered him speechless. The cubs were playing in a patch of sunlight, their fur glossy and healthy, their movements full of energy and life. The mother bear was nearby, sorting through a fresh collection of plants with that same methodical precision Lily had first witnessed weeks ago. Ethan raised his binoculars, his hands shaking slightly, and watched as the bear selected specific leaves, rejecting others that looked identical to the untrained eye. He turned to Lily, his eyes wide with disbelief and awe. Everything she had told him was true, but seeing it in person was different. This was paradigm-shifting. This was the kind of discovery that came along once in a generation, maybe once in a century. They spent the day in silent observation, Ethan taking his own photographs, making his own notes, occasionally exchanging glances of amazement with Lily. As the sun began to set, the bear did something new. She looked directly at them, both of them, acknowledging their presence openly for the first time. Then she did something that made both scientists question their sanity. She picked up a particularly beautiful wildflower with her mouth, walked halfway toward their position, and gently placed it on the ground before returning to her cubs. It was a gesture so deliberate, so obviously meaningful, that neither Lily nor Ethan could speak for several minutes. The bear had not just tolerated their observation, she had welcomed it. She had, in her own way, invited them to be witnesses to her miracle. That evening, back at Lily's small cabin, Ethan examined the plant samples she had collected. His portable analysis equipment could identify the basic species, but there were anomalies. The cellular structure of some plants showed modifications that didn't match any known specimens. The chemical composition was complex beyond what should have been possible for simple forest plants. It was as if the plants themselves had been altered somehow, enhanced or activated by something he couldn't identify. The moss showed trace elements that didn't belong in this ecosystem. Minerals that seemed to have been concentrated through some unknown process. The more he studied the samples, the more questions arose. This wasn't just about an intelligent bear anymore. This was about something fundamental happening in this forest, something that transcended individual species. Lily shared more of her observations from the past weeks. The growing luminescence in the plants around the den, the spreading effect of the bear's medicine throughout the local ecosystem, the way other animals had begun to show signs of learning from the bear's example. Ethan listened with growing excitement and concern. If this was real, if this was reproducible, it could revolutionize medicine, conservation, and the understanding of intelligence in nature. But it could also lead to the destruction of this miraculous place. They talked late into the night about what to do with this knowledge, how to protect it while also learning from it, how to honor the bear's apparent trust in them while fulfilling their responsibilities as scientists. The next morning, they returned to find the forest subtly different. The luminescence Lily had noticed in certain plants was more pronounced, visible even in daylight as a soft shimmer. The bear and her cubs were active, the little ones now strong enough to climb trees under their mother's supervision. Ethan set up more sophisticated monitoring equipment, devices that could detect chemical signatures in the air, electromagnetic variations, any measurable change that might explain what was happening here. The readings were unusual but not impossible, showing patterns that suggested some kind of network effect, as if the plants were communicating or sharing resources in ways that went beyond known botanical science. As they watched, the mother bear began what appeared to be a teaching session with her cubs. She showed them different plants, had them smell and touch each one, then demonstrated how to combine them. The cubs paid attention with a focus that seemed almost human, trying to imitate their mother's actions with their smaller, clumsier paws. It was clear that this knowledge was being passed down, that the cubs were learning not just what to do, but how to think about it, how to problem solve, how to heal. Ethan took detailed notes on the pedagogical methods the bear employed, the way she corrected mistakes, encouraged attempts, and rewarded success with affection. This wasn't instinct being triggered. This was education happening in real time. Around midday, something unexpected happened. A group of ravens landed near the den, carrying small offerings in their beaks, berries, seeds, even what looked like medicinal plants from distant parts of the forest. They placed these near the bear's medicine preparation area and waited. The bear examined the offerings, selected some, rejected others, and then prepared a small amount of medicine which she left on a flat stone. The ravens took it and flew away. Lily and Ethan exchanged stunned looks. This was trade. This was commerce. This was a medical practice that served multiple species, with payment and exchange systems that humans would recognize as sophisticated economic behavior. The implications were staggering. If animals had developed their own medical systems, their own knowledge bases, their own methods of teaching and trading, then everything humans believed about their unique position in the world was wrong. Ethan suggested they needed to expand their observation to see if this phenomenon was localized or if it extended throughout the forest. They spent the afternoon setting up remote cameras at various distances from the den, hoping to capture evidence of this behavior spreading. What they found over the next few days would challenge everything they thought they knew about the boundaries between human and animal intelligence. The cameras revealed a network of healing throughout the forest. Animals that had been treated by the bear's medicine were seen sharing plants with others of their species. The luminescent quality of certain plants was spreading outward from the den in a rough circle, as if the very forest floor was being transformed. Birds carried seeds from the enhanced plants to new areas, spreading whatever change was occurring. It was like watching evolution happen in fast forward. Except this wasn't random mutation and natural selection. This was directed, intentional, purposeful change driven by the knowledge and actions of a single bear and spreading through conscious choices made by multiple species. Ethan's analysis of the plants became more complex as he discovered compounds that shouldn't exist in nature, at least not in these combinations. Some of the molecules were similar to advanced pharmaceuticals. Others were completely novel. The moss contained what appeared to be natural antibiotics more powerful than anything in human medicine. The purple flowers showed properties that resembled both antivirals and immune system modulators. The algae from the creek contained proteins that could repair cellular damage at a fundamental level. It was as if the bear had discovered or created a natural pharmacy that surpassed human medical knowledge. But how was this possible? How could a bear know chemistry that humans had never discovered? The answer came from an unexpected source. While reviewing footage from one of the remote cameras, Lily noticed something odd. During the night, when the forest was lit only by moonlight, the luminescent plants pulsed in patterns. It wasn't random. There was a rhythm to it, almost like a heartbeat or maybe like communication. She showed Ethan, and they spent hours analyzing the patterns, trying to decode if there was meaning in the pulses. What they discovered was that the pulses synchronized with the bear's movements when she was preparing medicine. It was as if the forest itself was participating in the healing process, responding to the bear's actions, maybe even guiding them. This led to a radical theory. What if the bear wasn't acting alone? What if she was connected to some kind of natural intelligence, a forest consciousness that existed in the network of roots, fungi, and chemical signals that scientists were only beginning to understand? The idea seemed like fantasy, but the evidence was mounting. The forest around the den showed signs of organization that went beyond what any individual animal could create. The distribution of healing plants, the spread of the luminescence, the coordination between species. It all suggested a guiding intelligence that transcended individual organisms. They decided to test this theory. Ethan had brought equipment that could detect mycorrhizal network activity, the fungal threads that connect trees and allow them to share resources and information. The readings around the bear's den were off the charts. The underground network was incredibly active, with signals passing back and forth at rates that suggested massive information transfer. When the bear prepared her medicine, the network activity spiked. When she fed her cubs, it spiked again. It was as if the entire forest was participating in the healing process, sharing information, contributing resources, working together to save the cubs, and, by extension, to heal the ecosystem itself. The cubs, now fully recovered, had begun to show their own remarkable abilities. They could identify medicinal plants without their mother's guidance, seemed to understand which combinations worked for different purposes, and even attempted to help other animals they encountered. One afternoon, they found an injured squirrel and, under their mother's supervision, prepared a simple version of the medicine and left it where the squirrel could access it. The level of empathy and intelligence they displayed was extraordinary. These were not just bears following instinct. These were thinking, feeling beings with knowledge and compassion that rivaled anything in human society. As their 4th week of observation began, Lily and Ethan faced a crucial decision. They had enough evidence to publish a paper that would revolutionize multiple fields of science. They could become famous, win prizes, change the world's understanding of nature and intelligence. But they also knew that publishing would mean the end of this miraculous place. Scientists would come, then tourists, then developers. The bear and her cubs would be captured for study. The forest would be dissected, analyzed, and ultimately destroyed in the quest to understand it. The very act of revealing this wonder would ensure its destruction. They talked about it constantly, weighing their scientific duty against their growing feeling that they were guardians of something sacred. The bear had trusted them, had even seemed to invite them to witness her miracle. Did that trust come with responsibility? Did they have the right to expose her secret to a world that might not be ready to understand or respect it? Ethan suggested they could publish anonymously, share the knowledge without revealing the location, but they both knew that wouldn't work. The scientific community would demand proof, coordinates, access to verify the claims. There was no way to share this discovery without destroying it. One morning, they arrived to find the bear waiting for them at their usual observation spot. She had never come this close before. In front of her was an arrangement of plants, laid out almost like a display. She looked at them, then at the plants, then back at them. The message was clear. She was teaching them. Over the next hours, she demonstrated combinations, showed them preparation techniques, indicated dosages with remarkable precision. It was as if she knew they were scientists, knew they could understand and remember, knew they could carry this knowledge forward. She was passing on her wisdom, trusting them with the forest's secrets. That night, Ethan made a suggestion that surprised them both. What if they didn't publish in traditional journals? What if instead they found ways to introduce this knowledge gradually, anonymously, through channels that wouldn't lead back to this place? They could leak information about the chemical compounds to pharmaceutical researchers, share the plant combinations with herbalists, distribute the knowledge in ways that would help humanity without exposing the source. It would mean giving up fame and recognition, but it might allow them to honor both their scientific calling and their responsibility to protect this miraculous ecosystem. They began to document everything with this new plan in mind. They created detailed guides to the medicines, the plants, the preparation methods, but without any geographical indicators. They developed chemical formulas that could be synthesized in labs, removing the need to harvest from this forest. They wrote about the intelligence and empathy of animals in ways that would inspire protection rather than exploitation. It was slow work, requiring them to rethink everything about how scientific knowledge was typically shared. But it felt right. It felt like what the bear had intended when she had trusted them with her secrets. The forest continued to evolve around them. The luminescence spread further each day, creating an ethereal beauty that was both scientifically fascinating and spiritually moving. Animals that had been healed by the bear's medicine showed lasting changes, not just in health but in behavior. They were calmer, more cooperative with other species, more likely to share resources. It was as if the healing had affected not just their bodies, but their consciousness, creating a more harmonious ecosystem. Predators still hunted, but only what they needed. Prey animals were still cautious, but not constantly fearful. The balance of nature remained, but it was a gentler balance, one based on necessity rather than excess. The bear cubs grew stronger and more independent each day. They ventured further from the den, always returning with new plants for their mother to examine. Sometimes she approved, adding them to her pharmacy. Sometimes she rejected them, teaching the cubs the subtle differences between healing and harm. The cubs seemed to understand that they were learning something important, something that would be their responsibility to carry forward. They practiced their medicine-making skills daily, and while they couldn't match their mother's expertise, they showed promise that one day they would be healers in their own right. One afternoon, a hawk arrived at the den with a broken wing. It was a magnificent bird, but the injury was severe. The mother bear examined it with surprising gentleness, then began preparing a special medicine. This was different from what she gave her cubs or the fawn. She added new ingredients, things Lily and Ethan hadn't seen her use before. She created not just medicine to swallow, but a poultice for the wing, using spider silk to bind it in place. The hawk remained still throughout the treatment, as if it understood that the bear was trying to help. It stayed near the den for days, accepting food and medicine from the bear, until its wing had healed enough for flight. The interspecies cooperation was remarkable, but what struck Lily and Ethan most was the communication. The animals weren't just coexisting, they were actively working together, sharing information, helping each other in ways that suggested a complex social structure that transcended species boundaries. The ravens continued to bring offerings, receiving medicine in return. Deer would alert the bears to dangers. Even predators seemed to respect the healing space around the den, hunting elsewhere as if understanding that this place was neutral ground, a sanctuary for all who needed healing. Ethan's chemical analysis revealed more mysteries. Some of the compounds in the bear's medicine appeared to be quantum entangled, maintaining connections at a molecular level that shouldn't be possible in organic chemistry. It was as if the medicine created lasting bonds, not just within the body it healed, but between bodies, creating a network of healed animals that remained somehow connected. This might explain the coordinated behavior they were witnessing. The way healed animals seemed to share knowledge and act with unusual cooperation. The implications for neuroscience, for understanding consciousness itself, were profound. As their 5th week of observation began, they noticed the mother bear was preparing for something. She created larger batches of medicine than ever before, storing them in multiple locations throughout her territory. She spent extra time teaching her cubs, ensuring they knew every plant, every combination, every technique. She began marking trees with her claws in specific patterns, creating what looked like a map or guide that her cubs studied intently. It became clear she was preparing to leave, to move on to new territory, but she was ensuring that the knowledge would remain, both in her cubs and in the forest itself. The night before the bear family departed, something extraordinary happened. The luminescent plants throughout the forest pulsed in unison, creating waves of soft light that rippled outward from the den. Animals gathered at the edges of the clearing. Deer, rabbits, foxes, birds, even a few wolves, all watching peacefully as the bear family prepared to leave. The mother bear walked among them, touching noses with some, nuzzling others as if saying goodbye. Her cubs followed, mimicking her actions, learning that their role as healers meant connection with all forest creatures. Lily and Ethan watched this farewell ceremony with tears in their eyes. They had witnessed something beyond science, beyond simple animal behavior. They had seen wisdom, compassion, and community in its purest form. As the bear family walked past their observation spot, the mother stopped and looked directly at them one last time. She placed a single paw print in the soft earth, deliberate and deep, then continued on her way. The cubs looked back several times as they followed their mother into the darkness, as if ensuring the humans understood that they were now the guardians of this knowledge. The next morning, the den was empty, but the forest was far from abandoned. The luminescent plants continued to glow. The healed animals continued their cooperative behavior, and the medicine stores the bear had created remained, protected by the various species that had benefited from them. Lily and Ethan found the paw print the mother bear had left. Inside it, growing already despite being planted just hours ago, was a small seedling of a plant they had never seen before. Its leaves had a subtle luminescence, and when Ethan tested it, he found it contained concentrated versions of all the healing compounds they had documented, as if the bear had left them the master key to her entire pharmacopoeia. They carefully transplanted the seedling, knowing it was both a gift and a responsibility. This plant, whatever it was, represented the culmination of the bear's knowledge, the forest's wisdom, and the trust that had been placed in them. They would study it, learn from it, and find ways to share its benefits with the world without revealing its source. The bear had made them part of something larger, something that transcended the boundaries between human and nature, between science and mystery. They were no longer just observers. They were participants in an ancient wisdom that was just beginning to reveal itself. The forest where the bears had lived continued to thrive, becoming more magical with each passing day. The luminescence spread to neighboring areas, carried by birds and wind, seeds and spores. Other animals began showing similar behaviors, preparing simple medicines, helping injured creatures, demonstrating intelligence that suggested the bear's influence was spreading like ripples on a pond. Lily and Ethan established a permanent observation post, disguised as a simple research station, where they could monitor and protect this extraordinary place while learning its secrets. They began their careful campaign of sharing knowledge, publishing papers about chemical compounds without revealing their source, inspiring research into animal intelligence without mentioning the specific bears, promoting forest conservation by highlighting the undiscovered medicines that might exist in nature. It was slow work, often frustrating, but they knew it was the right approach. The bear had trusted them not just with knowledge but with wisdom, the understanding that some things must be protected even as they are shared. The truth can be revealed without destroying its source. The autumn air carried a different quality now, something Lily and Ethan had learned to recognize as the forest's own language. 6 weeks had passed since they first witnessed the miracle of the healing bears, and the transformation of this patch of wilderness had become something beyond their wildest scientific dreams. They no longer thought of themselves as mere observers, but as chosen witnesses to something ancient and profound. The mother bear and her cubs had been gone for 2 weeks, but their legacy lived on in every glowing leaf, every cooperative interaction between species, every impossible healing that continued to occur in their absence. Lily stood at the edge of what they had come to call the sacred grove, watching as a fox with a previously mangled leg walked smoothly past, fully healed by the medicine the bears had left behind. The fox paused, looked directly at her with eyes that held an intelligence she would have dismissed as anthropomorphism just months ago, and continued on its way. Ethan had spent the morning analyzing the seedling the mother bear had left in her final paw print. The plant had grown with impossible speed, reaching the size of a small sapling in just 2 weeks. Its leaves contained compounds that defied conventional chemistry, molecules that seemed to adapt their structure based on what kind of healing was needed. When he tested it on damaged tissue samples, The plant's extract somehow knew whether to fight infection, repair cells, or stimulate growth. It was as if the plant contained not just medicine, but some form of biological intelligence that could diagnose and treat simultaneously. He had started calling it the master plant, though Lily preferred the name gift bearer, acknowledging that this was not something they had discovered, but something that had been deliberately shared with them. The forest itself had become their greatest teacher. Every day brought new observations that challenged their understanding of how ecosystems functioned. The mycorrhizal network that connected the trees had grown denser and more active since the bear's departure. Using specialized equipment, Ethan could actually track signals passing through the fungal threads, patterns that resembled neural activity in a brain. When an animal was injured anywhere in the grove, the network would pulse with activity, and soon other animals would arrive carrying the specific plants needed for that particular injury. It was as if the forest had developed a collective consciousness, a shared intelligence that transcended individual organisms. The bears hadn't just left medicine behind. They had awakened something in the forest itself, teaching it to heal, to care, to think as one living system. Lily had documented 17 different species now actively participating in what she called the Healing Covenant. Ravens and crows served as scouts, identifying injured animals and somehow communicating their location and condition to others. Deer and rabbits had become carriers, transporting medicinal plants to where they were needed. Even predators had modified their behavior, avoiding hunting in the healing zones, and sometimes even contributing to the medicine stores by bringing rare plants from distant territories. The cooperation crossed every boundary that ecology textbooks said should exist. Prey animals worked alongside predators, birds coordinated with mammals, and even insects seemed to play their part, with certain beetles specifically tending to the luminescent plants, ensuring their health and spread. The luminescence itself had become one of their most fascinating studies. It wasn't simple bioluminescence like fireflies or deep-sea creatures produced. The light seemed to emerge from the plant's cellular structure itself, a soft glow that peaked during healing activities and dimmed when the forest was at rest. Spectral analysis showed that the light contained frequencies that promoted cellular repair in animals, almost like a form of phototherapy that the forest administered automatically. Plants that grew near the strongest luminescence showed enhanced medicinal properties, as if the light itself was a catalyst for producing healing compounds. The entire grove had become a living pharmacy, constantly adapting and improving its medicines based on the needs of its inhabitants. One morning, Lily made a discovery that changed their understanding of what they were witnessing. Hidden beneath a fallen log, protected by a careful arrangement of stones and leaves, she found a collection of objects that the mother bear had left behind. There were 12 different types of seeds, each wrapped in a different kind of leaf. There were 3 stones with natural holes in them, filled with crystallized forms of the medicine. And most remarkably, there was a piece of bark with what could only be described as markings, deliberate scratches that formed patterns, almost like a primitive writing system. The marks corresponded to different plant combinations, showing which seeds should be planted together, which stones contained medicine for which ailments. It was a medicine guide, a textbook written in the language of claw marks and natural materials. Ethan spent days decoding the bark manuscript, cross-referencing the marks with their observations of the bear's medicine-making process. What emerged was a sophisticated system of knowledge that included not just what plants to use, but when to harvest them, how to prepare them, what combinations to avoid, and even what songs to hum while preparing them, for they had recorded the mother bear making specific vocalizations during medicine preparation. Sounds that Ethan discovered created vibrations that affected the molecular structure of the compounds. The bears hadn't just stumbled upon natural medicine. They had developed or inherited a complete medical system as complex as any human traditional medicine practice. The implications for human medicine were staggering. Several of the compounds they had isolated showed promise for treating conditions that modern medicine struggled with. One combination appeared to repair nerve damage that was considered permanent. Another showed potential for reversing certain types of cellular aging. A third compound could apparently trigger the body's ability to regenerate tissues that humans normally couldn't regrow. But Lily and Ethan remained committed to their decision not to reveal the source. Instead, they had begun a careful process of introducing these discoveries through indirect channels. They sent anonymous samples to research laboratories with notes about possible applications. They posted molecular structures on scientific forums under pseudonyms. They leaked just enough information to start research projects without ever revealing the miraculous grove that was the source of it all. The forest's influence had begun to spread beyond its original boundaries. Animals that had been healed in the grove carried something back to their home territories. Not just health, but behavioral changes that promoted healing and cooperation in their communities. Lily had started tracking some of these animals and found that wolf packs with healed members showed less aggression and more cooperative hunting. Bird flocks that included grove-healed individuals demonstrated more complex social structures and communication. It was as if the healing process did more than repair bodies. It evolved consciousness, promoting empathy and intelligence in ways that traditional evolution would take millions of years to achieve. One afternoon, while reviewing footage from their remote cameras, they witnessed something that made them question the very nature of reality. A deer with a clearly broken leg had dragged itself to one of the medicine caches. As it consumed the stored medicine, the luminescent plants around it began to pulse in rhythm. Then, impossibly, the deer's leg straightened, not over days or weeks but in minutes. The bone visibly realigned, the swelling reduced, and within an hour, the deer was walking normally. It wasn't just accelerated healing. It was something that approached what could only be called miraculous. Ethan ran and reran the footage, checking for equipment malfunction, but everything was functioning normally. They had recorded something that violated known laws of biology. The master plant had revealed more secrets as it grew. Its root system had spread throughout the grove, connecting with the mycorrhizal network in ways that created a hybrid system, part plant, part fungus, part something else entirely. When Ethan traced the root network, he found it had formed specific patterns underground, geometric arrangements that resembled sacred geometry found in human spiritual traditions. The golden ratio appeared repeatedly in the root arrangements. Fibonacci sequences determined the spacing of growth nodes. It was as if the plant was following mathematical principles that governed not just biology but physics, creating harmonics in the soil that promoted healing throughout the grove. Wildlife began arriving from increasingly distant locations, somehow aware that healing was available in the grove. Birds with broken wings, mammals with infected wounds, even reptiles with various ailments made their way to this sanctuary. What was remarkable was not just that they came, but that they knew exactly where to go and what to do when they arrived. They would go directly to specific medicine stores, consume exact amounts, and then rest in particular spots where the luminescence was strongest. There was no trial and error, no learning curve. They arrived with knowledge they couldn't have gained through experience. The only explanation was that information was being transmitted through methods science hadn't yet discovered. Lily had begun to experience something she couldn't explain scientifically. When she spent long periods in the grove, she found herself knowing things she shouldn't know. She would suddenly understand which plants to photograph, where to position cameras to capture important events, when to arrive to witness significant moments. It wasn't telepathy exactly, more like an enhanced intuition that seemed to come from the forest itself. Ethan experienced similar phenomena, finding himself drawn to particular specimens that turned out to contain novel compounds, or suddenly understanding chemical relationships that had puzzled him for days. The grove wasn't just sharing its medicine. It was sharing its knowledge directly with those who spent enough time within its influence. The seasonal changes brought new revelations. As autumn progressed, the luminescent plants didn't die back as normal plants would. Instead, they seemed to enter a different phase, their glow shifting from green-white to gold-amber. The medicine stores the bears had created developed a crystalline coating that preserved them perfectly. The entire grove began to prepare for winter in ways that showed foresight and planning. Animals that would normally migrate stayed longer, building up reserves of health and strength. Those that would hibernate prepared special dens near the strongest luminescence, ensuring they would receive healing light even in their dormant state. One evening, as the first snow began to fall, something extraordinary happened. The entire grove lit up in a display that took their breath away. Every luminescent plant pulsed in perfect synchronization, creating waves of light that rose from the ground like aurora borealis in reverse. The light formed patterns in the air, spirals, helixes, geometric forms that hung suspended for moments before dissolving. Animals throughout the grove stood still, watching, as if participating in some form of ceremony. Lily and Ethan could only watch in awe as the forest celebrated or communicated, or perhaps simply existed in a state of unified consciousness that humans had no words to describe. In the days following this display, they noticed accelerated changes in the grove. New species of luminescent plants appeared overnight, growing in impossible locations, on rock faces, in pure sand, even on ice. The medicine stores reorganized themselves, with animals moving supplies to create a more efficient distribution system. The master plant produced seeds for the first time, each one glowing with its own internal light. When Ethan analyzed these seeds, he found they contained the entire knowledge base of the grove's medicine encoded in their DNA. Not just the chemical compounds, but information about preparation methods, combinations, and applications stored in the genetic structure itself. They realized they were witnessing evolution in real time, but not evolution as Darwin had described it. This was directed evolution, conscious evolution, where the forest itself was choosing how to develop, what traits to enhance, what knowledge to preserve. The bears had been the catalyst, but the process had taken on a life of its own. The grove was becoming something new, a superorganism that transcended the sum of its parts, a living system that could think, plan, heal, and teach. It was becoming what ancient cultures might have called sacred, what mystics might have called conscious, what scientists had no framework to understand. Winter brought unexpected challenges and revelations. A harsh blizzard threatened to destroy much of the grove, but the forest responded in ways that defied explanation. The luminescent plants generated actual heat, creating microclimates that protected vulnerable species. Animals worked together to build shelters, sharing body heat across species lines. The underground network pumped nutrients to stressed trees, keeping them alive through conditions that should have killed them. The grove had become resilient in ways that went beyond adaptation. It had become actively self-preserving, capable of responding to threats with coordinated action that suggested planning and purpose. During the deepest part of winter, when the outside temperature dropped to dangerous levels, the grove maintained a temperature just warm enough to sustain life. The luminescence shifted to infrared frequencies that provided warmth without visible light. Animals that should have been in deep hibernation remained semi-active, taking turns watching for danger, maintaining the medicine stores, caring for the weakest among them. It was a community response to crisis that human societies would admire but rarely achieve. The forest had developed not just healing abilities but social structures that ensured survival through cooperation rather than competition. Lily documented something remarkable during this period. Young animals born in the grove after the bear's influence began showed abilities their parents didn't have. Young foxes could identify medicinal plants without being taught. Fledgling birds knew complex songs that communicated specific information about plant locations and properties. Deer fawns demonstrated problem-solving abilities that adult deer from outside the grove couldn't match. The healing process had become hereditary, passing not just through genetics but through some other mechanism that science had yet to discover. The grove was creating a new generation of animals that were born with the knowledge their parents had learned. Ethan's research had reached a critical point. The compounds he had isolated didn't behave according to known chemistry when removed from the grove. They would work for a time, then lose potency, as if they needed connection to their source to remain active. He theorized that the medicines weren't just chemical, but somehow quantum entangled with the grove itself. Healing wasn't just about the right molecules. It was about connection to the living system that created them. This explained why the bear's medicine had been so effective. It wasn't just medicine, but a connection to the healing intelligence of the forest itself. As winter began to ease, they received an unexpected visitor, a young black bear. Clearly one of the cubs they had watched being healed returned to the grove. It was alone, mature now, and it carried in its mouth a bundle of plants they had never seen before. The bear went directly to the old den, placed the plants in one of the medicine preparation areas, and began to work. Its movements were confident, skilled, showing that it had not just remembered but had developed its own techniques. It prepared a new type of medicine, one that seemed designed for a specific purpose they couldn't immediately identify. Over the following days, the purpose became clear. Animals began arriving with ailments the grove's existing medicines couldn't fully address: cognitive decline in elderly animals, genetic disorders that affected newborns, even what appeared to be animal versions of autoimmune conditions. The young bear's new medicine worked on these conditions, not curing them entirely but managing them, improving quality of life, extending functional years. The bear had innovated, had developed new treatments based on the foundation its mother had provided. The medical knowledge wasn't static. It was growing, evolving, improving with each generation. The young bear stayed for a week, teaching the grove's animals about the new medicines, showing them which plants to gather, how to prepare them. Then, like its mother, it prepared to leave. But first, it did something that brought tears to Lily's eyes. It approached their observation post, closer than its mother ever had, and left them a gift, a small collection of the new plants, carefully arranged with marks on bark showing preparation instructions. The bear looked at them for a long moment, intelligence clear in its eyes, then turned and walked back into the wilderness. The knowledge was being passed not just to animals but to them, the human witnesses, trusting them to use it wisely. Spring arrived with an explosion of new growth. The luminescent quality had spread to cover nearly 5 square miles of forest. New species of healing plants appeared weekly. Animals from hundreds of miles away somehow knew to come here for healing. The grove had become a pilgrimage site for the natural world, a place where the impossible became routine, where healing transcended the physical and touched something deeper. Lily and Ethan had documented hundreds of healings, dozens of new medicinal compounds, and behavioral changes that suggested a fundamental shift in how these animals experience the world. They had also noticed changes in themselves. Months of exposure to the grove had affected them in subtle but profound ways. Old injuries that had plagued them for years had healed. Their minds felt clearer, their intuition stronger. They found themselves understanding complex scientific relationships without conscious analysis, as if the forest was teaching them directly, downloading information into their consciousness. They had become part of the grove's network, connected to its intelligence in ways they were only beginning to understand. The boundary between observer and observed had dissolved. They were participants in the miracle now, not just witnesses to it. The master plant had grown into a magnificent tree, its branches spreading over the old bear den like a protective canopy. Its bark had developed the same luminescent quality as its leaves, and it produced flowers that were unlike anything in any botanical textbook. These flowers released pollen that carried the healing properties through the air, creating an atmosphere within the grove that promoted health just by breathing. Animals would rest beneath the tree when they were sick or injured, and the combination of its shade, its light, and its airborne medicine would accelerate their healing in ways that seemed to bend the laws of time itself. One morning, they discovered that the tree had produced fruit. Small, golden orbs that glowed from within, each one containing seeds that were themselves complete medicine factories. When Ethan analyzed the fruit, he found it contained not just healing compounds, but nutritional elements that were perfectly balanced for whatever creature consumed them. The fruit would actually change its chemical composition based on who was eating it, adapting to provide exactly what that individual needed. It was personalized medicine that surpassed anything human technology could achieve, delivered in a form that was beautiful, delicious, and freely given. The grove had developed its own weather patterns. Rain fell here when the outside area was in drought. Mists rose from the ground on cold mornings, carrying the medicine through the air. Wind patterns circulated in ways that distributed seeds and pollen optimally. It was as if the grove had gained some control over its immediate environment, creating conditions that promoted healing and growth regardless of what was happening in the larger ecosystem. The boundary between the grove and the outside forest had become a gradient rather than a line, with the healing influence spreading outward in waves that grew stronger with each passing season. Wildlife behavior in the grove had evolved to something approaching civilization. Animals had developed roles. Some were gatherers, some were guardians, some were teachers. They had created a complex social structure that transcended species boundaries. Predation still occurred, but it was minimal and seemed almost ceremonial, with predators taking only the old or severely injured, and even then with what appeared to be respect and gratitude. The grove had achieved a balance that human societies dreamed of, but never achieved. A community where individual needs were met while the collective thrived. Lily had started writing about their experiences, but not as scientific papers. She wrote stories, fables, myths that contained truth without revealing facts. She wrote about wise bears and healing forests, about the intelligence of nature and the medicine of compassion. The stories spread online, inspiring people to look at nature differently, to consider that perhaps the forests held wisdom that science had overlooked. She never mentioned the real grove, never provided coordinates or specifics, but the stories planted seeds in human consciousness just as the master tree planted seeds in the earth. Ethan had taken a different approach. He had begun synthesizing compounds based on what they had learned, creating medicines that were inspired by, but not directly taken from the grove. These synthetic versions were less powerful than the originals, but still effective enough to help people. He published the formulas openly, refusing to patent them, ensuring they would be available to anyone who needed them. Pharmaceutical companies scrambled to understand how he had developed such effective compounds, but without knowledge of the grove they couldn't replicate his process. The healing was spreading into human society, but in ways that protected the source. They had become guardians of something precious, protectors of a secret that was too important to reveal and too valuable not to share. They walked a careful line, spreading the grove's wisdom without exposing its location, sharing its medicine without depleting its resources. They had learned that true knowledge came with responsibility, that some miracles were meant to remain mysterious, that the greatest discoveries were sometimes those that were never formally discovered. The grove had taught them that healing was about more than fixing what was broken. It was about connecting to something larger, something that transcended individual existence. As their first year of observation came to an end, they stood at the edge of the grove, watching the sunset paint the luminescent plants in shades of gold and amber. The forest pulsed with life and intelligence, a symphony of healing that played out in light and chemistry, behavior and consciousness. They had witnessed the impossible, had documented the miraculous, had become part of something that challenged everything they thought they knew about the world. The Mother Bear's gift had been more than medicine. It had been an invitation to see the world differently, to understand that nature held wisdom that science was only beginning to glimpse. The young bear that had visited was seen occasionally in distant parts of the forest, spreading its knowledge, teaching other bears, creating new groves of healing. The network was expanding, not through human intervention but through the natural intelligence of the forest itself. Other observation sites had reported unusual animal behavior, unexplained healings, plants with properties that shouldn't exist. The miracle was spreading, quietly, naturally, without fanfare or recognition. The world was changing, evolving, healing itself in ways that most humans would never notice but would benefit from nonetheless. Lily often thought about the mother bear, wondering where she was, what new miracles she might be creating. Had she known what she was starting when she healed her cubs? Had she understood that her actions would ripple outward, transforming not just a forest, but potentially the entire relationship between humanity and nature? Or had she simply been a mother, desperate to save her children, who had tapped into something ancient and powerful that had been waiting for someone to remember it existed? The questions had no answers, but that was part of the beauty. Some mysteries were meant to be preserved, some miracles were perfect in their incompleteness. The grove had become a bridge between worlds, the scientific and the spiritual, the human and the natural, the known and the unknowable. It existed in a space that conventional thinking couldn't quite reach, a place where the impossible became everyday, where healing transcended medicine, where intelligence wasn't limited to brains but existed in the connections between all living things. It was a reminder that humans, for all their knowledge and technology, had barely scratched the surface of understanding the world they lived in. The forest held secrets that science might never fully decode, wisdom that couldn't be published in journals, medicine that worked through mechanisms beyond current comprehension. As darkness fell, the grove came alive with its nightly display of light. Patterns emerged in the luminescence, complex geometries that suggested meaning without revealing it. Animals moved through the light, their forms becoming part of the pattern, adding to the complexity and beauty of the display. It was communication and art, medicine and mystery, all woven together in a tapestry of living light. Lily and Ethan watched in silence, no longer trying to document or analyze, simply experiencing the wonder of it. They had learned that some things were meant to be felt rather than understood, that the deepest truths often came wrapped in mystery. The master tree's canopy had grown to shelter the entire clearing where the bear den had been. Its roots had spread throughout the grove, connecting with every plant, every fungus, every microscopic organism in the soil. It had become the heart of the grove's intelligence, the central processor in a biological computer that computed not in binary but in the infinite complexity of life itself. When the wind moved through its branches, it created sounds that were almost like music, harmonies that promoted healing in frequencies human ears could barely detect. The tree had become more than a plant. It had become a living temple to the possibility of healing, a monument to the wisdom that nature had always possessed, but humans had forgotten to see. The future stretched before them, full of questions and possibilities. How far would the grove's influence spread? What new healings would emerge? What would happen when the young bears had cubs of their own, passing on not just instinct, but learned knowledge, accumulated wisdom, evolved consciousness? Would humanity ever be ready to know the full truth about places like this grove? Would science evolve to understand what they had witnessed, or would it always remain just beyond the reach of conventional understanding? The questions were endless, but they no longer felt urgent. The grove had taught them patience, had shown them that some answers came not through investigation, but through participation, not through analysis, but through connection. They had documented thousands of hours of footage, taken millions of photographs, collected hundreds of samples, written volumes of notes. But the real treasure wasn't in the data. It was in the transformation they had undergone, the expansion of their understanding of what was possible. They had entered the forest as scientists and had become something more. Witnesses to wonder, guardians of mystery, participants in a miracle that was still unfolding. The bears had healed more than just their cubs. They had healed the human observer's relationship with nature, had shown them that the divide between human and animal, between science and spirit, between possible and impossible, was an illusion created by limited thinking. As they prepared to leave for the night, knowing they would return tomorrow to continue their vigil, they took one last look at the glowing grove. Somewhere out there, the mother bear continued her work, teaching, healing, transforming the world one small miracle at a time. Her cubs, now grown, carried on her legacy, spreading the knowledge that healing was possible, that nature held medicines beyond human imagination, that intelligence and compassion existed in forms humanity was only beginning to recognize. The grove stood as proof that the world was far more magical than most people believed, that miracles weren't supernatural but natural phenomena that humans had forgotten how to see. The walk back to their cabin was lit by the soft glow of luminescent plants that had spread beyond the grove's original boundaries. The healing was expanding, naturally, organically, following patterns that seemed random but revealed deep organization when viewed from the right perspective. They had become part of this expansion, carriers of knowledge that they shared carefully, protectively, ensuring that the miracle could continue without being destroyed by discovery. They had learned that sometimes the greatest scientific discovery was knowing what not to reveal, that wisdom included understanding when mystery was more valuable than explanation. That night, they dreamed of forests around the world beginning to glow, of bears and other animals developing healing knowledge, of a planet slowly recovering from wounds humanity had inflicted, not through human intervention but through the awakening of nature's own intelligence. The dreams felt less like fantasy and more like prophecy, visions of a future where the boundary between human and nature had dissolved, where healing was as natural as breathing, where the impossible had become so common that it was no longer considered miraculous. The grove had shown them that this future was not just possible, but already beginning, spreading from forest to forest, carried by animals and wind, seeds and stories. When morning came, they would return to the grove to continue their observation, their protection, their participation in the ongoing miracle. But for now, they rested, their bodies and minds touched by the same healing that had saved the bear cubs, connected to the same intelligence that guided the grove, part of the same story that had been unfolding since the first mother tried to heal her first sick child. The miracle wasn't ending, it was just beginning. The bears had shown the way, the grove had provided the proof, and now it was up to those who had witnessed it to ensure that the healing continued, spreading like light through darkness, like hope through despair, like love through a world that had forgotten that nature itself was the greatest healer of all. The story of the healing bears would never be published in scientific journals, would never win prizes or recognition, but it would live on in the grove that continued to grow and glow, in the animals that carried its medicine to distant forests, in the humans who had learned to see the world through new eyes. It would live in the synthetic medicines that helped people without them knowing the miraculous source, in the stories that inspired children to look at nature with wonder instead of indifference, in the slowly spreading understanding that humanity was not separate from nature but part of it, capable of participating in its miracles if they could just remember how to see them. The whispering forest had revealed its secrets to those patient enough to listen, wise enough to protect what they had learned, and humble enough to understand that they were students, not masters of the natural world. The mother bear had created more than medicine for her allergic cubs. She had created a bridge between worlds, a doorway to understanding that healing was not just about chemistry, but about connection, not just about medicine, but about consciousness, not just about saving individual lives, but about transforming the entire web of life. The miracle was complete, but it was also just beginning, spreading outward in ripples that would continue long after the last witness had forgotten what they had seen, carried forward by the eternal wisdom of the forest itself.